The most powerful military on earth just blinked. Not quietly, not through a back channel. Publicly, on Truth Social, under Donald Trump's own name. 2 hours before his own deadline expired, and the one where he said a whole civilization will die tonight, Trump picked up Iran's document, called it a workable framework, and signed it. The obliteration never came. The deadline killed nothing. And the world watching that moment is now asking a question that does not have a comfortable answer for Washington. How do you recover credibility after your enemy's contract becomes your peace plan? Hold that thought, because what I am about to show you is not just a story about one ceasefire. It is a story about how a country with no aircraft carriers, no global military network, and no superpower status sat down at a negotiating table, refused to change a single word of its own document, and watch the other side sign it. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly how this happened, why Trump's own rhetoric became the instrument of his retreat, and why the world you are living in today looks fundamentally different from the one you woke up in a week ago. Imagine you are in the most high-stakes negotiation of your career. You slam your contract on the table and announce that if the other side does not sign by 8 o'clock, you will burn everything down. 8 o'clock arrives. You do not burn anything down. You pick up their contract instead, and you sign it in public. How long before every person in every room you ever walk into again remembers exactly what your deadlines are worth? Drop your answer in the comments. Was this Trump's strategic flexibility or the most publicly visible miscalculation in modern American foreign policy? Let us rewind the clock. It started in the spring of 2025. Coordinated American and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure sent the region into a convulsion. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's traded oil flows every single day, went dark almost overnight. Energy markets lurched. Shipping insurance rates exploded. Trump issued his terms through a 15-point framework, dismantled the nuclear program, constrained the missiles, reopened the strait on Washington's terms. Iran looked at that framework and said no, not let us negotiate the details. No, full stop. For weeks, as Trump escalated his rhetoric to registers most American presidents have never approached in public, Iran was doing something else entirely. It was drafting its own document. 10 points. No softening language, no ambiguity designed to invite a counteroffer. A complete self-contained framework that Iran presented as the only legitimate architecture for any conversation that followed. Washington called it maximalist. A senior American official told Axios it was unclear whether it would allow moving forward. That was 2 weeks ago. Receipt number 1, the deadline that dissolved. Trump announced his 8 o'clock deadline with the vocabulary of absolute finality. A whole civilization will die tonight. Less than 2 hours before that clock hit zero, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir made contact with the White House, and the obliteration was suspended. Trump's own Truth Social statement made the mechanism explicit, based on conversations with Pakistan's leadership, wherein they requested he hold off the destructive force being sent to Iran that night. He agreed to pause. The most powerful military apparatus in human history was paused because a mediator asked politely. Washington was not setting the tempo. Washington was waiting for the phone to ring. Receipt number 2, the document that never changed. In that same statement, Trump wrote that the United States received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believes it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. The identical framework a senior American official publicly dismissed as maximalist weeks earlier is now the official starting point for every conversation that follows. Iran's demand for sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's insistence on uranium enrichment as an Iranian right, Iran's requirement for full sanctions relief, Iran's call for war damage compensation, Iran's demand for American force withdrawal from the region. Not one clause softened, not one word amended. Iran did not move. Washington moved. Iran's Supreme National Security Council responded with a formal government statement declaring that Iran had achieved a great victory and forced criminal America to accept its 10-point plan. That is not a social media post. That is an official document from Iran's highest security body. And Trump's own words do not contradict its core claim. Receipt number 3, the architecture of the room where it happened. Iran's foreign minister declared that Tehran would cease operations for 2 weeks and allow ships to transit the Strait of Hormuz via coordination with Iran's armed forces. Coordination, not open passage. Iran's military is now the operational authority over one of the most critical waterways on Earth, with a $2 million per ship toll attached. According to multiple reports, China was described as very influential in shaping the off-ramp through Pakistani mediation. Russia was involved in the broader diplomatic architecture. The two powers Washington has spent years attempting to contain were among the principal architects of the framework. Washington was not the first one in that room, and that absence was deafening. If this video is connecting dots you have not seen assembled anywhere else, you are already ahead of most people watching this unfold. Hit subscribe right now. This is moving faster than any single outlet can track, and you need to be here when the next piece drops. Most governments facing a military superpower issuing deadlines do one of two things: capitulate immediately or scramble for a face-saving compromise. Iran did neither. Iran entered this confrontation with a single document, held it for weeks without revision, and waited. It used every mediator, every regional relationship, every diplomatic back channel to anchor its own framework as the only legitimate document in the room. Iran built its narrative architecture in advance so that the moment a ceasefire was announced, the official framing of who won was already written, already published, already in the hands of every major news organization before Washington had finished explaining itself, not with missiles, with a document, a network, and patience. Trump's approach was built on blunt force, ultimatums with specific clocks. Explicit threats against named infrastructure, a vocabulary of absolute inevitability. But blunt force only functions if the other side believes the threat is truly unconditional. After weeks of deadlines that bent and ultimatums suspended at a phone call, Iran had accumulated enough receipts to demonstrate publicly that the force had a ceiling. Iran did not match Washington's military language. It made that language look like theater. So what does this mean for you? If you work in shipping, energy, or global logistics, the Strait of Hormuz just became a coordinated toll corridor with Iran as the operational authority. The $2 million per ship fee is not symbolic. At daily Hormuz traffic volumes, that is a structural revenue mechanism with cascading consequences through energy pricing, freight costs, and the price of nearly everything that moves through a supply chain touching the Persian Gulf. If you follow defense and security, every Gulf state, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, is now recalibrating what American security guarantees are actually worth. When Washington accepted as workable a framework it previously called maximalist, every government built around American commitments had to ask a question it did not want to ask. Israel's officials acknowledged they received updates only in the final moments. That is not the language of partners who plan together. That is the language of a partner being notified after the decision is already made. 3 scenarios from here. Scenario 1 is the managed reset. Negotiations open in Islamabad. Both sides carry incentives toward a structured agreement. Trump frames whatever emerges as a historic peace. Iran locks in sanctions relief, enrichment recognition, and reconstruction funding, but the structural changes remain regardless. Iranian Hormuz Authority, China and Russia as demonstrated diplomatic architects. The architecture is already built. Scenario 2 is regional realignment at scale. Other powers draw the explicit lesson Iran just demonstrated. A disciplined refusal to accept maximalist framing, combined with a coherent alternative framework and patient positioning, can force renegotiation even from apparent military inferiority. Countries hedging toward Beijing and Moscow now have a live time-stamped case study. New networks once operational do not dissolve. They become the baseline. Scenario 3 is the one nobody wants to name out loud. The ceasefire is fragile. Within hours of its announcement, reports of ballistic missile activity were circulating simultaneously from multiple directions. Iran's supreme leader ordered forces to halt while stating, "This is not the end of the war." If hardliners calculate that the 2 weeks represent cover for repositioning rather than genuine de-escalation, the Islamabad talks could collapse before producing a single agreed paragraph. Whatever happens next, the lesson has already been delivered. American ultimatums have a visible, documented price ceiling. Pakistan demonstrated it can pause a military operation with a phone call. China and Russia demonstrated they can shape off-ramps where Washington arrives reactive. That lesson does not expire with the next news cycle. The blueprints do not vanish. They become the reference point for every negotiation, every ultimatum, every deadline that follows. Iran did not start this confrontation, but it was precise about how it intended to frame the end point. It built the document. It held the document. It waited for the other side's rhetoric to reach its own ceiling, and then it handed over the pen. Did accepting Iran's document represent genuine strategic flexibility, or did maximum pressure collapse under the weight of its own rhetoric? Is this ceasefire the foundation of a long-term settlement or a 2-week repositioning pause? And what do America's Gulf partners do next, knowing their security architecture just shifted without their full consultation? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe, because the Islamabad negotiations, the Israeli response, and the Gulf state recalibrations are coming fast. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified experts before making decisions based on the information presented.